Hey friends, welcome back to another episode of Black Queer Unapologetic. Today's episode is called And Queer Anti-Blackness. And before anybody gets defensive, let me say this clearly and upfront. This episode is not about canceling shows or a show. It's not about saying that people can enjoy what they enjoy. And it's not saying that white gay love stories are bad. I actually like the show too. This episode is about patterns and it's about power, and more so about the power that is exposed from those patterns. And it's about how conversations about men of color somehow always end up being about Black people, especially when we're talking about desire and romance and who gets to be seen as lovable on screen. And this episode exists because I posted a couple of Instagram reels about representation in gay media, specifically about who gets centered in mainstream queer love stories, queer male love stories, just to be clear. And the response proved my point better than I ever could. So today I want to slow that conversation down, not to argue, not to clap back, and mainly to name what's happening. So anyways, let's get into it. Black. Disclaimer, I am a little sick, so if my voice sounds weird, that is why. I changed the order on these episodes because I felt like this needed to come out now instead of later, since I posted what I'm talking about in this episode on social media fairly recently. So excuse the voice, and I know I sound a little stuffy. Anyways, enjoy. Black, queer, unapologetic. Black, queer, unapologetic. I know who I am, now you know what I'm about. I say the thoughts in my head out loud. Let's get into it, let's pick up the flow though. Brought to you by the one they call JoJo. Black, queer, unapologetic. Black, queer, unapologetic. Let's go. Okay. So let me start by clarifying something. I talked about men of color in queer male media. I did not say Black people in those Instagram reels that I posted like a week or two ago. And yet nearly every negative comment I received was about Black people. Not about Latinos, not about Asians, not about indigenous queer folks. It was about Black people. That's not an accident. That is how the hierarchy works. Now, I understand that I am a Black person. I've been Black my entire life. But when I was talking about my opinion with Heated Rivalry, the show that was produced by Crave, and then it was on HBO. Crave is a Canadian company. They have a distribution partnership with HBO, who released the show in the United States. When they saw a Black face discussing this pattern that I have observed, they automatically went to Black people, when my point was it wasn't about Black people. It was about people of color. So when you name that pattern and you name that power that is being exposed by those patterns, people hear a threat. And when Blackness enters the conversation, even implicitly, it becomes the emotional lightning rod that sparks this conversation that the video wasn't even about to begin with. What I actually said in the video was pretty simple. Something to the effect of, when Hollywood tells mainstream gay love stories with budgets, marketing, award campaigns, and cultural reach, they almost always center whiteness. Even when men of color are present in those love stories, the end game still orbits white desirability. That's not a moral judgment. That's just an observation. And I gave examples, which I'll get into later. But what people heard was, you're attacking the show, you're ruining the fun, you're making this about race, which tells me the discomfort isn't with my tone, it's just about the truth. And I acknowledge that, one of the characters in the show out of the 4 men is Asian. I'm aware of that. 3 of them are white and 1 of them is Asian. But the acknowledgement of the truth of what this story being told on the show sparked was a lot of support, which I appreciated because a lot of people understood what I was trying to say. But also a lot of people who just decided that they were just going to attack Black perspectives and Black people and say that Black queer stories are boring. Which, I don't think it's true. But, if you feel that way, that says a lot more about you than it does about me. Just saying. But let's talk about the criticism because it does matter. One of the most common responses I got was, and I quote, "If people of color want representation, they should just write and produce it." Okay. This sounds empowering, but it's actually one of the most dishonest arguments we can use because it pretends that creation and access are the same thing, and they're not. People of color do write queer stories. People of color do create queer films and shows. The question is, and that I brought up in the video that I posted on Instagram, is who gets funded? Who gets marketed? Who gets renewed for a 2nd, 3rd, 4th season? Who gets a spinoff show? Who gets protected when ratings dip? Or protected when shows get rage reviewed the first day that they drop? A couple months back, I did a review on Instagram on Ironheart, which was on Disney Plus. It's a Marvel show, and it centered queer characters, Black characters, female-led show. And it got rage rated because people don't like women, they don't like Black people, and they don't like queer people, so they just hated the show. But the show takes place in Chicago, and you're telling me that this isn't realistic when I'm just like, for real? I just don't get it. Anyways, I digress. Telling marginalized people to just create it ignores the entire system that decides whether that creation survives. Again, the funding, the marketing, the renewals, the rage reviews or ratings. Another argument that I saw a lot was these aren't even mainstream Hollywood stories, which I find interesting because those same stories are often described as groundbreaking, universal, the greatest love stories ever told. But the moment critique enters, suddenly they're small stories, they're niche stories, they're not comparable. You can't have it both ways. You just can't. And if a story is big enough to be called universal, it's big enough to be examined. Then there was the tone policing. Why does everything need to be an anthropology dissertation? Stop being a buzzkill. Just let people enjoy things. I didn't ever say that you couldn't enjoy the show. By the way, these are direct quotes. I never said that you couldn't enjoy the show. I was pointing out an observation from my perspective of a Black queer man who oftentimes sees these stories play out a certain type of way. And a lot of these, comments were coming from people who were not male, They were coming from people who were not queer and coming from people who were not Black. Well, they were coming from white people, to be honest. But these comments, I don't see those as being rebuttals to my argument. I don't see them as being engaging as a conversation, because I actually did get comments from people who were trying to have a conversation about like, oh, well, what about this show? I'm like, okay, well, that came out 25 years ago, and this is the reason why, blah blah blah. And like people are asking, oh, well, what were your favorite shows, and like what would you suggest, and things like that. And I appreciate that, because we're having a conversation. I can appreciate a conversation. But the other comments that I got that like flipped the conversation into being about Black people, when I was talking about people of color, representation in general, across the queer community and like media and the things that get actual funding and marketing, it felt more like less like a rebuttal and more like a request for silence. Like, shut the fuck up and just like watch the show and let people watch whatever they want to watch. Like, you can't have an opinion. Like, okay, sure. But what I feel like that really means is that your perspective interferes with my comfort. And there was this one comment, the one that mattered the most. If a Black character, this is a quote, if a Black character is involved, the story becomes about race, and that's boring. That sentence said everything to me, because, again, I was not talking about Black characters. I was talking about people of color and men of color in romance stories and men of color in queer romance stories. And it automatically became about Black people. And so the white characters get to be human and humanized, and Black characters get assigned homework, essentially. So, I mean, these are the things that are coming out of people's mouths, man. Like, another defense people leaned on heavy was realism. Now, I was using Heated Rivalry as a example. Not the blueprint, but the example. And people were saying, hockey is white. This industry is white, as far as like acting and things like that. That's just how it is. And to be clear, I already know that. I already acknowledge that. But realism is not a neutral standard. It is a selective one. We suspend belief all the time when it benefits white stories. Like, timelines get compressed, bodies are idealized. We can get into the whole thing about bodies and neurotypicalness, etc. in media. I do appreciate the fact that they did add someone that was not neurotypical into the mix of that show. But here's the question people keep avoiding. And this is the question that I was asking in those videos. Where are the present day, romantic, joy-centered, multi-season, well-funded, well-marketed stories about men of color loving each other? Not tragedy, not history, like, or side characters like Pose or Fellow Travelers. Not pain first narratives, not learning or teachable moments, just love. When people respond by listing decades old films or shows, documentaries, or trauma-centered stories, they're not answering my question, and that's really just proving my point. Representation frozen in the past is not the same as representation being allowed to live forward. The world is a changing place. Noah's Ark was brought up so many times, and I loved that show back in the day, but it came out in 2005, I believe. And they just did like a movie that just came out, but like again, that's like a limited release, you know. And that the original show only ran for 2 seasons on Logo, which I don't even think was like a cable network at the time, and it got canceled. So here's the part I want to land on, because this is the real damage and it's rarely talked about. Actually, I need to take a break. Give me a second. I need to catch my breath because I have a lot more to say. Okay. So I'm talking about the shows. I'm talking about the way that representation shows up in these shows. I'm mainly talking about race, but if we wanted to really get into it, like body types are not fully represented in gay queer male media. Race is not. Neurotypicalness is not. Well, neurodivergent rather is not. Um, it's just like, Jojo, what's your point? Well, my point is, I'm 36 now. Noah's Ark came out in 2005. I was, I want to say like 16, maybe 16 or 17, depending on when it came out. Media doesn't just reflect culture, it programs desire. So when young queer people of color grow up watching love stories, whether it be a movie or a TV show, they're not just watching entertainment. They're absorbing a blueprint. Let me explain. First of all, your brain's not fully developed, right? You're learning, you're observing, you don't know stuff. You're learning what you like. You're learning who you like. You're learning why you like those things, right? What romance looks like, what happiness looks like, who gets chosen, what's attractive, who is centered, who is peripheral, the hierarchy of things, pretty privilege, all of that shit. And over, the image of queer happiness looks like proximity to whiteness on television. That doesn't mean people consciously think that I only want white partners, but it does shape attraction, expectations, self-worth. It's basically desirability politics. I've seen this play out in real life more times than I can count. And I know someone personally who is biracial, has a black parent and a white parent, who has a deeply fractured relationship with his black father. And as a result, he refuses to date black men. Not because of compatibility, but because blackness has been coded as something negative in his emotional framework, that he holds these negative beliefs about black men, beliefs that don't come from individual experience, but from like association because of the relationship that he has with his father. That's it. Just the father, nobody else. His black friends, but he will not date a black man. And that didn't happen in a vacuum. That's what media does when it repeatedly shows you black men as trauma and pain and as problems and as side characters, and rarely as just, healthy love. This is not about blaming individuals. It's about understanding conditioning. When people say, why does this matter? This is why. This is why. I mean, I feel like women talk about a lot of the same stuff when it's like, body image, you see the same type of girl, like in the love story, right? Like she looks a certain type of way. I hear women talk about that all the time. Like, oh, you don't see the, the thicker girl. You don't see the taller girl. You don't see, the girl with the glasses or the frizzy hair. She has to look a certain type of way. Representation doesn't just change what we see. It changes what we believe is possible for us. And queer people already build our understanding of love through scarcity. Like, we don't get a lot of examples of that, right? Like, maybe you have, today, when I was growing up, that did not happen. But like today, like you may, go to school where you see somebody who has, two moms or two dads, or many of us don't see ourselves reflected at all growing up. So when representation does arrive, it does feel precious. You feel seen. You feel there are possibilities for you. And I think, based on a lot of stuff that I've been seeing just like in the world today, that is why this critique feels threatening. But protecting representation doesn't mean pretending it's perfect. And celebrating progress doesn't mean ignoring hierarchy. Queer anti-Blackness shows up when Black perspectives are dismissed as being too much, or the critique coming from a Black person is framed as divisive. Black presence is tolerated only when it doesn't disrupt the desire that may have been programmed. And for me, that's not unity, and I think it's conditional belonging. Like, you can be queer, but you just can't be too Black. So let me end this by saying it plainly. I'm not asking for fewer white queer love stories, and I'm not asking for people to stop enjoying what they enjoy. I'm not asking for that. I am asking why stories about men of color loving each other, the Black guys loving Black guys, the Asian guys loving Asian guys, the Latinos loving Latinos, the Latinos loving the Asians, the Black men loving the Latinos, et cetera, whatever combination you want to add. I'm asking why stories about men of color loving each other with joy and depth and a future are still treated like risks. I'm asking why Black queer love is so often allowed only in pain and history and tragedy. And I'm asking us to be honest about how media shapes desire, especially for young queer people who are still figuring out what love is supposed to look like. Because if the only image of happiness we ever see is adjacent to whiteness, that doesn't just shape media culture, it will shape lives. This conversation isn't about guilt. It's about awareness. And awareness is the first step that we can take towards true change. So I will end with this. If this episode made you uncomfortable, good. Sit with that. If it made you defensive, ask why. Don't ask me why, ask yourself why. And if it made you feel seen, you're not imagining things. I like to think about what I'm saying before I speak. Anyways, that's all I have to say on this. Just let it go. Thank you for listening to Black Queer Unapologetic. As I always say, stay Black, stay queer, and if you are neither, always stay unapologetic. And I will see you on the next one. Bye.